Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod Barbecue. On today's episode, we're going to talk to Mr. Cory Burns, who has been in the PR world for, well, the better part of a decade. Cory is now with Kahn Media, but Cory is a rabid motorcycle enthusiast, automotive enthusiast. His butt has graced the seats of more motorcycles and cars than most of us can dream of. And honestly, truly, one of the nicest, most genuine people you will ever find in the automotive industry. However, before we get to Cory, want to let you know about the Hemmings Classified section, of which we have 25 to 30,000 cars online at any given time. You want to talk about a selection, we got it. We also have our auction, so if you're thinking of buying and selling, please go to Hemmings Auctions and check us out. With that being said, give us about 3 or 4 seconds, and we'll be right back with Cory Burns from Kahn Media. Hey, everyone, welcome back. This is another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod Barbecue Podcast, and today we have Mr. Cory Burns, PR veteran, auto enthusiast, bike enthusiast, currently is with Kahn Media, one of the nicest people, most educated, and just one hell of a great guy. Cory, how you doing, man? What's going
up,
on?
man? Thanks for having me on. I'm stoked to chat with you in a more official fashion. So yeah, things are good.
Very, very good. Now it's Cory's done PR now for, it's got to be coming up on 12, 13 years.
Yeah,
is that right?
almost 13 years.
Okay, so you're currently with Kahn Media. Now, for those that don't know, Cory is everybody that there's a bunch of people that work in this industry. Some people are good, some people are bad, as we all know. Now, the other part of that is the people that work in this industry generally don't live this industry. I should say a lot of people don't live this industry. And what I mean by live this industry is you're either a hardcore motorcycle guy, a hardcore drag racer, a hardcore car guy. Cory kind of runs the gamut with all this stuff, right?
But pretty well-rounded at this point.
Pretty well-rounded. But what I didn't know, and just so everybody out there knows, we always ask a couple of questions before. I had no idea that your father raced AMA like pro bikes and funny bikes and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's even before I was born in '89, so I'm 32 now, and he raced for Vance Hines, so for Byron and Terry. He was pro stock and funny bike, and he was national #1 in 4 different sanctions in '82. And my brother was born in '82, so then he kind of slowed down that side of his life and took on a gig in the automotive parts industry. But it's weird because it all sort of is coming full circle now that we're both adults, and he's got a bike now and I've got sport bikes, and so now we get to ride together and kind of we enjoyed that hobby too. We were growing up riding motocross too, so it's just kind of cool. We all kind of come from a family of gearheads.
Yeah, so that the seed was definitely planted early, which is really cool. So what was that like growing up? Did you just grow up around dirt bikes and drag bikes and stuff like that? Was it commonplace for you?
Probably my earliest recollection, or maybe the thing that really turned me on to the car hobby. I feel like I've always I'm pretty afflicted. I call it Cars Burgers, where you just shout out random facts about cars that and like I talk about like how much wasted memory space there is of car facts that nobody cares about. But it really started. I mean, I always grew up, playing with toy cars. But the biggest thing was my dad was doing some detailing, and a friend of his had a 993 turbo. Wow. And he was detailing it and ended up having it for a week. That was selling it for the guy. So he took me to school when I was in elementary school in the 993, and I remember like the first pull of what that felt like to be in something, because I was pretty young, and this was before I had my first dirt bike. And I remember that moment, and I was like, oh, this is it. Oh, this is the thing. And after that, I was drawn to two wheels. I was on my bicycle all the time. That's what I was doing as a kid. And I got my first dirt bike at 9. So I got a Honda XR80, and I remember sort of like the early start of that, where you go out and, you're on these little, cheap tires that we bought for it. And I thought it was cool because it had a pro circuit pipe on it. And I remember going into the sand the first time, and you realize how slow it is, and learning how to stand up and balance it in the sand and go through that whole process. But I feel like that bike was so formative in sort of the way I approached everything else. And so I grew up riding dirt bikes with dad, and, that was always it. And then I was obsessed with downhill mountain bikes. So that was my next transition is, straight into, I would go to the dirt jumps with my friends. We'd be building jumps, and Ended up going to Whistler, did a little bit of racing, just at local stuff. So like was obsessed with that. And then, as soon as I got my, the pickup truck, I bought my first Tacoma, and, that was just to drag bikes around. And, the first time I slid that thing through a dirt corner by the house, it was like, oh, the car thing's pretty good too.
So bikes affected you early on, right?
Yeah.
You started out on dirt. Obviously, the seed was planted by your pop, racing and all that stuff. Then you got bit a little bit by, a 993 turbo. Which, let's face it, if something's going to make an impression on you, like a 993 turbo is a pretty good one to
yeah. And I remember another one too. It was a BMW Isetta 600 limousine, and we took that to a car show. So he had detailed it. It was getting ready to sell. So I took it to a show with a for sale sign. And I remember riding in that and opening the door in the front and having that whole experience. I was like, oh, this is also awesome. So it's just like peppering of like stuff that everybody goes, oh yeah, I get that. And then like weird stuff that maybe explains why my tastes have gotten more obscure over the years.
So, all right. So now you realize that you like motorcycles, you like mountain bikes, you're digging cars. How did the whole getting into the industry happen? Meaning getting into the car industry? How did you do that?
So in high school, I was working two jobs. So I worked at my dad worked at a company called IMC, which has now been bought and sold a couple times. But they, like a parts third party distribution company. So they, OEM replacement parts. That's what they did. So my first job was there working in the warehouse. And I was driving the little electric carts and pulling brake rotors and stuff and dropping off orders. And then on the weekends I work at the bike shop, and that I actually had it was, indentured servitude basically just to pay for my bike hobby. So, so I worked there, and a family friend, a guy named Joe Molina, he actually owned another firm, and, I was just out of high school, 18. Sure. And he had said, hey, my assistant is going to be out for 2 weeks. Do you want to come and, help out? And I was like, yeah, sure. Like if you need it. Yeah, sure. And I knew he had a bunch of cars. He used to drive he had like an E38, 740. He had an Aston. I always would see his stuff and I'd be like, oh, he's a car guy. Like we always talked and hung out. Yeah. So I came in, I helped out, for 2 weeks. And like the first day I remember he said, hey, can you take my Bentley Arnage? It was like a 2001 Bentley Arnage to the car wash. And I was like, yeah, sure. Okay. So I took it to the car wash and I called my dad. And this is like when we had flip phones. And I called my dad and I'm like, Dad, I'm driving Joe's Bentley. And he's like, get off the phone, So, so it was like a moment like that where I go, this is pretty cool. Like right on, and I'm doing like assistant stuff, just helping run errands and all that. And he said, hey, the staff seemed to really have taken a liking to you. And would you want to come and do an internship?
Sure.
And I was like, yeah, sure. Like it was all car stuff and they had represented a bunch of cool brands at the time. And so I started there and I started working under my current boss, Dan. So I kind of started out in the forums, learning how to use forums and do that. And I had no traditional PR marketing background other than the fact that I like to talk about cars. So started there and then ended up getting a full-time job, as an account coordinator and, worked on, Meguiar's, and I worked with Mosler and all these other, Galpin and a bunch of brands that all, it all kind of comes back around. But that was sort of my intro. And then Dan left a little bit after that and started Kahn Media. And maybe like a year later, I had checked in with him. Hey, what are you up to? And, he had just started. And so it was an office in Reseda, California. And it was two of us and me and Alana Scher, who
sure,
of course. All three of us working together. And I came in, as an intern first and then, worked my way up. So it's interesting because I knew nothing about PR. I was a decent writer just from from around. I went to community college. I didn't graduate, didn't go get my BA or anything like that.
Right.
But having the crash course of experience that I got was so transformative. And I don't think you could have that. You can't learn anything that I learned in school. So I got kind of the fast pass to like how to do this and how to do it the right way and, how to build relationships with people and, pitch story ideas and, work with news reporters and, all the stuff you could just never learn in school.
So how important was that? Because I mean, there are so many people out there where, you get a lot of questions, and I'm sure you get them all the time. How'd you get into
Sure.
the industry, right? And I think a lot of times the answer is internships. Learn from other people that do this. You don't necessarily have to go to college, and there are other avenues by which to get in here. And when you talk about practical experience, I think that, I mean, there is nothing that replaces on the job experience. Absolutely nothing.
No, and I think and especially in my age group too, people feel a lot of pressure when they get out of school. They're supposed to figure out what they want to do, and they got to go get their BA. And literally, getting your bachelor's degree is the only way that you get an interview. It's like,
Right.
oh, this is a requirement. If you look at any OEM that's hiring or whatever,
Sure.
it's must have bachelor's degree. But and I always question, but why?
Why?
Why
Yeah.
why does that matter? Because really what it comes down to is, you develop a skill set doing these things, and kind of jumping in feet first, you can figure out whether it's for you
Sure.
or not. And especially in an agency setting too, if it's there's a lot of plate spinning. So I think
Mhm.
that's something you get taught how to stay organized, and really how to, kind of manage expectations. And you can't learn what it's really like until you just jump in and do it.
So talk about that for a minute. Talk about the whole plate spinning thing, right? So Kahn Media, you guys deal with a host of clients at any given time, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you have a ton of clients on your plate. Kahn's got a ton of them. How do you manage that? And how is that something where the practical experience is the education that gets you to that next level?
I think really what it comes down to is always being available, because
Mhm.
there's as you go along, the only thing that you can't fix is your reputation if you screw that up.
Sure, of course.
So I think it's really being consistent with how you deliver, and being really transparent with how you communicate, especially when you're working with a bunch of different brands. So like, for example, we work with Lotus in the UK, and we manage their PR here in the US. And we work with aftermarket brands like like Automotive, or
Mhm.
whoever it might be. And everybody's sort of goals are different, and we kind of have specialists on each of those things. So the nice part is we really only kind of hire gearheads. So that really
Right.
helps. Most of the people, I mean, if you're working on like a lifestyle account, we have people that are really dialed into the entertainment industry and stuff like
Yep.
that. But I think the biggest thing is if you like the subject matter, it's really easy to pick up and do it.
Right.
But managing it all is really just, I think being transparent and being clear on the client's expectations, and what's realistic.
Right. Okay. So some of your clients, like, if you guys follow, what is your IG address? Your Instagram
Oh,
address?
it's at Cory C Burns. So
Okay.
just my name.
All right. You need to follow it if you haven't already, because here's the thing. Corey always posts these random pictures, and they're fantastic. It's either him dragging a knee around a corner, or with some insane like speed core carbon fiber charger, or something like your ass has been on or in the seats of some of the most amazing machines in the world. How does that
I
feel?
that is probably the thing that keeps me coming back, because the thing you can't buy, and I try to explain it to people, like, how do you get to do this? Oh, if I do this job, can I do
Yeah.
these things? And it really comes down to the access, where there's a moment, for example, like, you bring up the speed core build, like Kevin Hart's new charger.
Mhm.
And we're capturing photos for that, and we're creating content around the car, and we do the launch of it. And those opportunities to drive things like that, they come with a lot of experience, and also a lot of trust.
Right.
So
Sure. Of course.
that stuff is what I live for, because it's not like, oh, I just want to post it on the internet, show everybody how cool it is. But
Right.
I look at the experience as a whole, and I go, wow, like, this is rare. And I think every time something like that happens, I just want to appreciate how cool it is that I got to do that. And I think that's the step back that I always do. Like, wow, this is crazy.
I think, I think that's a great point. I mean, with the production work that I've done and all the cars that I've shot, right? And it's, when we talk about, whether it's an aftermarket or an OEM or a privately owned vehicle, right? When somebody hands you the keys to something that they are passionate about, or something that's a privilege. And I
Totally.
think a lot of people forget that. They just think, oh, I'm going to drive this thing. It's like, no, 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 no. Just take a step back, right? If somebody says, we trust you enough to drive this car, that's an absolute privilege. And I think to your point, taking that step back and being like, this is an experience that very few people alive are going to have and cherish that. I think that's such advice for people to take in.
Well, I think your conversation too about like somebody hands you the keys and goes, okay, hey, I trust you. My dad always used to say, like, always return something better than you received it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I would get a car from somebody or borrow something and wash it, or like, they get it back a clean thing or whatever it might be. And I feel like I've always sort of taken those little bits and pieces with me, including like get off your dead ass and on your dying feet.
Yep.
So I feel like that's been really important to really guide things along too, is like having a constant appreciation and not ever being jaded. Like, wow, like this is still awesome. Like we still get to do these cool things.
So walk me through some of your favorite experiences that you've gotten to enjoy. Some of the favorite vehicles, whether 2 wheels or 4, things that you're going to look back on in 10 to 15 years and be like, I still can't believe I did that.
So there's some on the personal side that had nothing to do with work.
Sure.
And other stuff that happened to happen, because of work. But I used to date a girl that was that lived in Germany. And so one year, I think 2012, I got to go to the Nürburgring and I rented a Suzuki Swift Sport, and it, great little car, makes no power. But it was perfect. It was like, I didn't want to get into something that I was just going to be over my head. Everybody thinks because they play Gran Turismo, they can just go out and, do a 7-minute lap. So
yeah, sure.
Got to go out and do that. I did 4 laps and like, just to check that off the list and have that experience was awesome. But I think, one of the ones that really sticks out, I think, Chris Cannell.
Sure.
So when he was working at Road and Track, we had represented Auctions America for a project when they launched this, I think it was the Collins Foundation, and they were selling military vehicles. And so, we were pitching stories for people to come up and cover it and see the collection and all that. So I had talked to Chris, and he and I were friends, and he said, I said, well, hey, I pitched it, and I asked Dan, I said, hey, can I go up there and check it out? I would love to be up there and see it. So we woke up at 5 a.m. We drove up to San Jose, and we're walking through this collection of everything from like Scud missile launchers to 272s and jumbo Shermans, like crazy. Like it was awesome because it's just, and they're like, climb all over them, do whatever you want.
Right.
And then, to sort of cap the whole thing off, we got to drive a tank. So we drove a 60s M551 Sheridan and drove it around this property up in San Jose where this collection was. And I just like, Chris and I still talk about it to this day. Like we drove up there same day and like actually getting to operate a tank while these guys who were managing the collection were sitting on there. And like, it was so cool. But I mean, there's so many things like that. I think, like Car Week, I got to drive the in original, not the car, but in original CTR Yellowbird, from Roof. And like, that's a call. What people don't understand, that's a call at 11:45 saying, hey, this event just wrapped up. Can you move these cars from one place to another? And
right.
Like, yep, sure. Sign me up.
Right.
So, and the motorcycle thing, it's funny. I was a customer of Aprilia before I started working with them. But then, getting to do launches with them and Moto Guzzi and spending time on product that I already enjoy and I'm already super familiar with has been really fun. So, RSV4 over the crest, at Laguna over the front straight of 153, it feels pretty good. So, yeah, I mean, I just want to pepper my whole life with experience. I don't really care about, the stuff will come and go, but I think I really want to like pepper in my life with being able to see and experience stuff. So.
Well, I think that's one of the keys. And it's funny, you talk about the motorcycle thing. And I mean, as like when Cory first started riding and, talked to me about it, there are some guys that ride this industry, but not all. And I raced back in the day, and it's, it's really interesting. And I mean, we've both been in all manner of high horsepower, everything on racetracks around the planet. Right. And I keep telling everybody, I'm like, I don't care what you drive. It doesn't matter. I'm like, there is nothing on this earth like dragging your knee through a corner, coming out with the back tire going a little bit sideways and then coming out in like a cross-up wheelie. Like, I don't care. You could be an astronaut. I don't care. As far as I'm concerned, and I've jumped out of planes and done all that stuff, there is no better feeling on earth than that.
No. And I mean, it's so funny. I think Johnny Lieberman and I have like a kind of just like banter going back and forth where he always wants to hate on motorcycles and give me a hard time. And,
Yeah.
so he posted a photo of driving the SP1, Monza the other day,
Yeah.
open top. And I said, hey, that looks a lot like riding a motorcycle.
Yeah.
I said, that's almost as good as riding a motorcycle. So it's, I think that's really honestly really opened up a lot of new friendships for me too. And just, I have a, group of friends, whether they're journalists or just, guys that ride or I meet at the track, but that's been really cool too, just to get together and like have an excuse to go screw around. I think one thing people don't think about a lot is sometimes it's a pain to go like, hey, I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to drive an hour to go get lunch. But on a bike, you don't care. You're like,
No.
oh, I'll go to Ojai for the day and I'll go ride 33 and I'll come down and have lunch
Right.
and spend 5 hours away. And I don't really care.
No, it's really funny because, when you talk about like the relationships that you make, right? The best friends that I have are through motorcycles and cars. Some of my old racing buddies I still talk to all the time. We're still close, even though they're 3,000 miles away on the East Coast.
Right.
Automobiles, it's the same exact thing. And, when you talk about the experiences, like I'm pushing 50. So for me, like I'm not dragging these around corners anymore. Like those days are gone. But I have pictures on my wall of me dragging these around corners and I'm like, I used to be that guy. Right. So, but the memory of that and the feeling of that, like when you close your eyes and think about it, I can still feel the heat coming through the puck on my leathers into my you know what I mean? That never ever goes away. And when we talk about cars, especially the cars that are out now, I mean, there are cars out there that are making 2,000 horsepower. And for guys like you and I, because we're in the industry, I'm not going to say it's commonplace, but to say I've gotten behind the wheel of something with 1,500 horsepower, you're like, yeah, okay, I have to, right? Where the general public is just like, what are you talking about? Like, that's a thing? And you're like, yeah, no, that's a thing.
Well, and it's funny. Like my dad keeps coming up in this too, and he always says it's better to be a has-been than it ever was.
Absolutely.
And so that one always sticks with me. And it's like, yeah, I just look back on this stuff, and I don't know. I feel like you get to share that with people, and sometimes like if I have a press car or something, if there's kids in the neighborhood or whatever, they like I used to have neighbors at my folks' place that love cars, so taking them around the block and like sharing that or throwing my dad in the right seat and letting him ride along with me in something like that stuff, to me, it's no fun to have it if you can't share it. And so I feel like that's really been fun for me too.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I mean, the bike stuff is a little more selfish.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, you know what I mean? That's just like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm going to go out. I need to blast around for 2 hours by myself, clear my head. Then I could come back and deal with society.
I think Leno said something about that too. Like the best thing about riding a bike is anonymity. Like you could be the biggest Brad Pitt too. He had a Desmo Sedici and he brought up something in an article one time that it was like, oh, I can put a helmet on and nobody has any idea who I am.
That's right.
And I think there's just something, it's unexplainable, but it's like people say, oh, that's dangerous or this and that. But I don't know. It's fun if you're not going out and doing that. Like what else is going to excite me?
So. Well, that's just it. And, I think anything, if you're in the automotive world or in the motorcycle world, there are always inherent dangers, right? And I think a lot of people will look at, especially when you're riding motorcycles, they'll say, well, do you know how dangerous it is? And people have to understand, like, you don't ride because you ride because you want to feel alive, not because you worry about being dead.
Right.
Right. And that is something that people will never, if you've never ridden, and I don't care, you could ride a 50cc scooter. If you do it right, it's the greatest thing in the world.
Oh, it's the best. Elemental motorcycling. Like we did the launch for the Moto Guzzi V7, and it's like as simple as it gets. It's a motorcycle. No, nothing crazy, no big power, but that riding something like that's just pure motorcycling and you're just doing the thing is so rewarding. And like you can give somebody that experience and they go, oh, I get it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's really funny. I need you to come up here. Like, have you ridden a bunch of vintage stuff yet? Have you?
No, I don't have a lot. I've ridden like old, Triumph Bonnevilles and stuff, but I don't have a lot of seat time on kind of classic motorcycles. So
I need you to come up here and I need you to throw a leg over some of my stuff because I think you would just be like, what do you mean there's no screen? What do you mean there's no traction
Oh,
control?
I could rock with that. No, traction control is no big deal. I'm fine. You just turn that off. That's the first thing I do on every bike. Is just
Oh, is it really?
turn it off. Yeah, because then most of them won't do wheelies unless you turn traction control off.
Well, I mean, because I'm just not familiar. I mean, that's just out of my realm, but don't the new bikes, especially the high power bikes, don't they have like wheelie control and everything else on them now?
Yeah. Sometimes at the track, I do appreciate it. Like on the Tuono has it. Like, for example, you come out of a corner and you come out of a dig and, you're not going to loop it, but you can adjust it to a point where it'll let it lift, but the yaw sensor will help it set it back down. So it'll get, like just for carrying speed, but off on the street, I just turned it all off because I want to have a good time.
Right.
But yeah, at the track, it'll help with lap times. The traction control thing has come in handy. Once you're at speed and you're really using the thing, occasionally it'll save you.
Oh yeah. Well, I think the other thing is the power. It's not uncommon for a bike to make 180 horsepower now.
Most of the new bikes make over 210.
Do they seriously?
Yeah, like a new RSV4 makes 217. 217 horsepower.
I think about that and it cracks. So my first race bike was an old, it was like a 95 or 96 Ducati 900 SS, right? Just steel trellis frame, basically an old Panta motor, air cooled. I think it made like 60 horsepower. Right. And we thought we were rock stars. You know what I mean? And then
this thing rips.
this thing is amazing. And then like you'd bump to like a ZX7. And I remember, then I had a Gixxer 1000 and it was like 120 horsepower. And I was like, oh my God, this is unrideable. And now 200 plus horsepower on two wheels, you're going, Jesus Christ. Like we
live in the best time. I've been talking about this the last couple of weeks. We live in the best time for cars and the best time for motorcycles at this exact moment. Literally, there's SUVs that make 700, 800 horsepower.
It's crazy.
It's crazy. We live in, because we're right at the peak. Like everybody's having the conversation about electrification. Yep. We're right at the end of that. And I think everybody's just like, all right, man, I think we can fit a Hellcat motor in there.
Oh, dude, that cracks me up. Like when you talk about this to people and like that Durango Hellcat, right? You're like, how much? It's a 700 plus horsepower. You're like, it's got 7 seats. Like, where are you going? And it's like, doesn't matter.
Motorcycles, you could buy super bikes with cruise control. Like it's just like we live in the best time. Like this is the best time to be an enthusiast. You can talk about politics. You can talk about all this other stuff. You can talk about, regulation or whatever, but just enjoy it. Just have a good time.
Right.
Like, if you get access to the cool stuff, like enjoy how crazy it is right now, because there's stuff with 3 catalytic converters, 900 horsepower. So I don't know. I feel like it just kind of comes back to being appreciative. Like, hey, we're here. Let's have a good time. Like, let's do it.
I think that's so true. That's such great advice for everybody because I think people focus on the negative so much. And then you're like, yeah, but then there's this, right?
Right.
That you can.
Well, and you look at like the car review process now, and like there really aren't bad cars. Like the worst rental car is like, it's all right. Like you get a Chevy Cruze, it like the chassis is like all right, like that's
fine.
The stuff is good. Like even motorcycling, like there really isn't a bad motorcycle. There's stuff that does one thing better than another, but they're all pretty good.
Right.
And like same thing, like getting somebody into the hobby. There's so much availability for people to do it now. There's 300s and there's Honda Groms or whatever it might be. There's so much access to get somebody into it. So I hope that maybe honestly the electric bike thing is cool, and I've had a chance to ride some of the stuff. But I think that might be a really interesting way to get people who are intimidated by the process of maybe doing the shift and like learning how to use the transmission and do all that, just to have the experience of motorcycling and then maybe graduate to something else after they do it. So, try to be optimistic.
From a PR standpoint, right? Because you do see the electric bikes and you do see the electric cars.
Yeah.
And as somebody who rides and is also a pretty deep-seated automotive enthusiast, do you think that the EVs, and we know EVs are lightning fast. I mean, we know EVs from a speed perspective has surpassed petrol-driven cars, right? We know that. But do you think viscerally ever be able to deliver the same amount of excitement and or raw experience as a gas powered vehicle?
No, I think I think there's two sides to it. So there's, the part where, like, if you think about like a modern sports car that might be electric powered, it probably, the way it delivers power is going to be so different. It could be faster and it could do all these other things. I think that maybe the next generation is going to look at it a different way. But for me, like, I want the experience of operating the thing on my own and being responsible for what happens with it. But I've also, like, I'm into RC cars, and
Sure.
I've watched having nitro trucks and running those and how much of a pain
Yep.
in the ass they were, and how many times I've blown them up, running them too lean, whatever, trying to make them go fast. But then you look at the technology now with lithium batteries for, electric drift cars, or how fast the little trophy trucks are, or the planes and all that stuff. So it's a good reference point, I think, for people to go like, oh no, like, stuff could still be really good and you can still enjoy the hobby. But I'm hopeful that there'll be sort of happy medium. Like, if we drive electric cars in our day to day, and that's what we use as our A to B. And then the rest of the time on the weekends, if we get to swing a leg over something, or we get to drive something that still excites us. So that's sort of the hope. And I think, people our age, Gen X, are looking at, look at Radwood, look at any of these events. Sure. I think there's more passion for cars than ever. It's just different stuff. It's just not 32 Fords and, $400,000, kudos. So,
right.
I just, I think it's always going to change, and it's always going to develop, and we're always going to be like, well, it was better then. But, like, who knows? Maybe somebody's going to come up with something that, we can find a happy medium. But I never want what we have now to go away. I still want to be able to appreciate that stuff, because, like, the motorcycle thing, you cannot replace the sweet noise of the V4, or, look, I'm a little biased, but you can't replace that. So I hope that we'll be able to kind of be able to do both.
I agree. All right. So one final question. What kind of advice would you give as somebody that works in the industry on the PR side and everything else? What advice would you give to somebody who's younger, who might be listening to this, to say, I want to get into this industry?
I think the biggest advice is find a thing that you like and figure out how to make money doing it. So, like, I have friends that have learned how to fabricate watching, HP Academy or whatever on YouTube, and done enough research and have learned how to teach themselves a skill. They could go make money doing that, and doing that for a really cool company. They could do it for a small outfit, whatever it might be. So I feel like you need to focus on your passion first, and then figure out a role within that passion that might make sense to you, or might make sense for your skill set. I've been somebody that was gifted with EQ, and I've been able to kind of, really read people and work with people. And I think that's my strong suit. So PR has fortunately shown me that there's a place for people like me that I'm mechanically inclined, but I'm not, like, not a fabricator. Sure. So there's a place for people like me to be in the industry and still get to enjoy the hobby and still get to enjoy being part of it. So I'd say find your passion, and then look within that space to figure out a job that might work for you. Because I think there's a lot of us. There's a lot of people that are in that are in just the PR trade, that work for major brands or do whatever, and they're gearheads on the side, and they like totally different stuff. Right. So I think that's really it, because everybody always says, like, oh, figure out what you want to do, and then go to school and do all this, and that's not for everybody. And it's okay. I think it's okay for that not to be for everybody. If you want to weld, you want to, Mike Rowe talks about that stuff a lot, where it's like, go to a trade school. You want to learn a craft. We need those people. We need people that have a skill that can fix the world's future problems. Not just programmers, not just people that, can, create in a digital space. We need everybody. We need everybody to learn how to continue to do that stuff. So find your passion, and then, do some research and figure out what's available within that space.
Yeah. Well, super solid advice for anybody who's listening out there. Finally, Cory, where can people find you, look at your stuff? Where can they find out about Kahn Media? Give us some addresses and plug whatever you wish.
If you like cats, motorcycles, gun stuff, and cars, then my Instagram is pretty much where I post stuff. But Otherwise, for more info on our agency, we're just Kahn Media, KAHN media.com. And, feel free to reach out to me, or if if a listener has questions and wants to learn more about how to get into the industry, I'm always take a DM and happy to answer any questions. So, yeah.
Dude, that is awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today, dude.
Bet,
it is always a pleasure to hang out for a little while and actually bullshit, because we never seem to have the time to do that.
Or we run by each other in So yeah, hopefully we'll get this vintage bike rip happening sooner rather than later. So
I think so. All right, buddy. Well, listen, thank you for coming on, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. See you, Mike.
Okay. Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.